Thank you so much for making time for me.
No problem.
Can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. I'm Cricket Myers. I'm a sound designer that's based in Los Angeles. Uh, I've been sound designing for almost 20 years now. No.
Why did you decide to become a sound designer?
I decided to become a sound designer after I graduated college. In college, I thought I wanted to be a stage manager, and I got out into the real world and realized I hated that. I don't have the attention span to stay, to see the same production night after night after night. So I decided I should go back to grad school, and that maybe I wanted to be a designer. So that's actually when I decided to be a sound designer.
Can you elaborate on your training?
Sure. So I went to Colorado College for my undergraduate. I got a BA in with a theater major, but the school, it was kind of a very general theater degree. So, and then I went out into the real world. I had a couple of internships. I internshipped with Central City Opera as a production assistant, and had a wonderful time, but quickly recognized that maybe I wasn't going to be a stage manager, because spending 3 months working on the same show every day wasn't for me. So I got an internship with Midland Community Theater in Midland, Texas. And it was a great opportunity because they were very open to letting the interns do whatever they wanted to do. So I got to, work with the TD. I got to work with the scenic designer. I got to do some scenic painting, which I'm really bad at. We got to work with the costume designer. And then what I really ended up loving was working with the lighting and sound designer. His name was Eddie. He was fantastic. And I really loved the way he worked, and I loved working in those mediums. So while I was at Midland, I decided to apply to grad school. So I applied to CalArts and got accepted into the sound master's program there, and went and got my master's degree in sound. When I was young, I swore up and down that I hated big cities, but I moved to LA for CalArts and fell in love with it. So I've been here ever since. So.
And what's the typical career path of a sound designer?
I don't know that any of us have a typical. I don't know that there is a typical. I think we all come at it from different angles. I chose to go to grad school. What I found was that after college, I didn't have any experience designing, so nobody wanted to hire me to design, but I couldn't get any experience if nobody would hire me. So I went to grad school. I got the experience. People started hiring me. I got the connections too in Los Angeles. I think some people come at sound from being a musician, and from having that knowledge of music, and having to set up their own gear for their own gigs. So they fall in love with it and branch out into sound design. I think some people come at it from being a composer, and branching out into theater with their compositions. But I wouldn't say there's a typical way. I tell people, I'm very glad I went to grad school, but I tell people that if you're getting the kind of jobs you want right out of college, then you don't need grad school. If you want to teach, you should go to grad school. It will help to have your master's to get those teaching positions. So it kind of depends, as you look further down the line, what you want to do, if grad school is worth it. So.
And do you usually start as a sound engineer, like A1 or A2, before becoming a designer?
No, I find that really amazing engineers are engineers, and really amazing designers are designers. I can engineer. I'm not very good at it. I can get the faders up. There's no grace to it, but I can get the show heard if I have to. But I worked as an engineer on a couple of shows, but it's not it's not what I'm really good at, and it's not what I love. And so I wasn't willing to put the time into becoming really good at it. So I actually didn't come from an engineering background. Some people do. I think it's one of the paths you can. But I do think theaters, you know, production managers and producers get to know you as an engineer, or they get to know you as a designer. And so sometimes it's hard, if they think of you as a crew person, to convince them that you're also a designer. So
What exactly do you do as a sound designer?
The way I see it is I am in charge of everything the audience hears as soon as they walk into the room. So on a play, it's going to be transition music, it's going to be underscoring, it's going to be the sound effects. It may be, some plays are mic'd, some plays are not. With the musical, it's more about the balance of the band to the vocals. But even on a play that isn't mic'd, if an actress isn't being heard, it's my responsibility to help that actress get heard, whether it's putting out foot mics or encouraging the theater to hire someone to help them learn to project, or, so I take kind of an overall view. If the room is really echoey and bouncy, I'm going to be the one who's going to the scenic designer and going to the producer saying, we need to hang drapes on the wall, we need to change the acoustics of the room. Even, so even that, I think, kind of falls under my job as sound designer. So.
And how much time do you usually have to design a show?
I'm typically hired 3 to 4 months out from opening. So I will read a script. I'll have conversations with the director. I'll have conversations with the other designers. It's not until, then maybe a month out, I'm working on ground plans and paperwork. And then it's 10 to 14 days of kind of in the room, 12 hours a day. We're in tech. That's what I do. And then, and I'm there full time, 6 days a week. And then once the show opens, I'm done. I move on to my next one.
So do you leave the show right after the previews on the opening night, or?
Yeah, technically my contract's done on opening night. So if I come to opening night, it's just there to celebrate. I'm not working anymore. But yeah, I leave an engineer or a board op to run it once I'm done.
What do you look at when you read a script for the very first time?
When I read a script for the very first time, I'm reading it for story. I don't worry about sound the first time I read a script. I am purely interested in the story being told. I'm interested in the journeys the characters are taking. I'm interested in why this play is relevant now. What speaks to me about the story? What do I like about the story? What do I like about the characters? What makes the story exciting for me? The second time I read the script, I'll go through and start marking things that are needed. The phone has to ring, or the dog has to bark because they comment on it, or this whole scene takes place on a busy city street, so I'm going to have something there. And then I also make a lot of notes about, as I go through that second time, about the emotion and about the journey. I'll write things like, there's a big shift here. Either the characters learn something, or he's discovered something, or she's, something in her life has changed. And so I'll write big shift, or big change here, or, highlight, this is a moment. Because that's when I start thinking about how sound can highlight those moments and can draw them out and draw your attention to them, whether the whole thing takes place on a busy street, so there's lots of traffic, and then when that big shift happens, maybe the traffic fades out or fades down a little bit. So it might be something subtle, but but something has changed, and that helps draw us our attention to the emotional shift in the character. So, but that's typically the second reading. Then I go through it again with the director, and make sure that their ideas about where those emotional shifts are in the same place that I think they are, or that they think, sometimes they have a different idea of what that character's journey is. So I'll make notes on where the director sees those shifts and what the director thinks that journey is. So then eventually, once I see a designer run and start seeing rehearsals, I can start marking what those shifts are. But I've kind of already laid out in my head where I think they're going to happen.
Is the way you read a script change over time with more experience?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've gotten better at it. I think a lot of it comes because I frequently work with directors I've worked with before. So I now know that director's aesthetic, and I know how that director works, and I know how that director thinks. So when I read the script, I have a very good sense of what drew the director to it and what they're going to be excited about. And I know which directors like to play. They like to have lots of underscoring and textures and drama, and which directors prefer a much more almost traditional or straightforward way where they really want silence and to focus on the actors, and it's really just about transitions, you know. So I've got a good sense coming in with some of these directors about what they like, or, you know, what their style is. So I kind of know how to approach the script. So.
What do you usually discuss with director during the first meeting?
During the first meeting, we talk about story, and we talk about emotion, and we talk about, you know, transitions and journey. I talk a lot about the difference between the plot and the story. The plot is, you know, they go here, they do this. So there's some practical things like you're on a busy street, or you're in a quiet library, or it's nighttime in the woods. But the story is the emotional arc that the play is taking. It's what happens to the characters. It's why we care about this play. So not only do I want the practicalities of the plot, but I want to highlight that journey. I want to highlight that story, you know, above and beyond the plot, because that's really what draws us in. It makes the audience care about these characters, and it makes them care about the play. So.
And what's the difference between designing a play as opposed to a musical?
When you design a musical, the music tells that story. So it's less, I don't have to sketch out those emotional journeys as well, because the music does it. So for me, it's about the dynamics of the music and the style of the music. When I put together a sound system for a rock and roll musical, it's going to be very different than when I put together a musical that's all strings and horns and have the more delicate, you know, textures to them. Something like Allegiance, you know, the instrumentation of that is so different than something like Jesus Christ Superstar, you know. So I look at that, and I look at the kind of sound systems I want to develop. Am I going for loud and in your face, or am I going for subtle reinforcement and delicate textures? Because the music already provides that for me, so I don't have to create it, but I have to support it, and I have to enhance it. And, you know, a delicate musical that's supposed to feel very natural and real won't feel that way on a big rock and roll sound system, whereas a big rock and roll sound show won't be exciting if the sound system can't get it loud, you know. But it's more about the instrumentations and the dynamics, and you know, which instrument to be drawn out where, and which instrument is telling the melody here, and which fill in the emotion, and finding those dynamics. But it tends to be a lot more about gear than it is about
And What's the difference between working in a small, like 99-seat venue as opposed to a big Broadway theater?
The biggest difference is money. The 99-seat houses don't have any. So you find yourself working with whatever you can find. I have a collection of random gear in my garage that sometimes gets dragged out because I really want to have a speaker upstage and the theater just doesn't have one. So I'm going to drag it out of my garage and put it up there because I want it. Whereas a Broadway house, you know, the resources are a lot greater, and so you can get the speakers you want, you can get the microphones you want, but I also find that the 99-seat houses, the directors are there to play and they're there to take chances. They're there to experiment. And so you can come in and say, I have this wild, crazy idea, and if I don't know if it's going to work. And they'll say, oh, great, let's try it. Whereas, you know, the bigger houses want things they know that it's going to work. They've invested a lot of money and they want the play to be successful. So they're, I think, a little less willing to play with you. They want something they know will work. So.
What's, in your opinion, the most common misconception about the job of a sound designer?
Ooh, most common misconception. I mean, I think that's hard because I think a lot of people don't have any idea what we do. You know, even people who see theater all the time, I think half of them, I've done a lot of kind of talks for audiences and, you know, talkbacks after shows. And when I say, you know, who here in the audience knows what a sound designer does, maybe 5 people raise their hand. I think a lot of audiences assume that all shows are mic'd. I think a lot of people assume that on a musical you can just turn the mics on and leave them on. I don't think they realize how much detail goes into everything we do. I don't think they realize that engineers, you know, the faders are moving with every single line, with every single word. I think they just assume if the actor's on stage, the mic is on. And it's never that simple.
Let's talk about line-by-line mixing.
Sure. It's hard. I'm not very good at it. I hire people who are very good at it. But the more you can mix line by line, the better the show's going to sound. You're going to get less background noise. You're going to get more volume out of the mics. But it's fast and it's hard. And it means that every word your finger is moving and every line your hand is moving. And there's a lot of programming that goes on in the board. You know, a lot depends on your cast. You're relying on your cast to be consistent. If your cast tends to improvise or they tend to forget words or skip sections of the script, you're screwed because you're going line by line by line. And if they suddenly skip 5 lines, you're behind and it takes you a couple lines to catch up and then you're still behind. You know, so you're relying on the cast to be with you too, and to not, you know, and to do exactly what the script says they're going to do, so that you can stay with them. But ultimately, you know, the shows sound cleaner. You don't get the phasing, you don't get the interactions between the mics because only the people speaking are on. And that's, it's always better.
Do you mix the show during the previews?
I don't know. I let the engineer do it. I'm really not. I shouldn't ever be allowed to touch the board. My engineers know better than to let me touch the board. But no, you know, and the engineers need the practice. They need to do it because, again, line by line mixing, you're not going to. The first time you do it, it's not going to go very well. You have to learn the rhythm of the cast, and the previews is the perfect time to learn that rhythm. The cast is settling into a routine, and you can settle into your routine with them. So I always let the engineers mix from day one. Depending on the engineer, I'll be more involved during tech. and that first sound check with the band and the first sound check with the cast. If it's a more inexperienced engineer, I'll be more hands-on with the EQ and hands-on with the game structure. If I work with an engineer named Christian, he and I have done at least 15 shows together at this point. I don't ever touch the console with him. He knows what I want the mics to sound like. He knows what I want the band to sound like. So I just stand in the house and he EQs them. And then he says, okay, I'm done. And I'll either say, no, you're not, keep working, or great, move on, you know? So, you know, it kind of varies during tech. But once we get into previews, I'm hands off.
And what's the difference between the job of A1 and A2?
So the A1 is in charge of everything front of house. So they're in charge of the board. They're in charge of, mixing the actual show. Typically, they're in charge of taking sound effects too. So they'll trigger any sound effects that need to happen. They program their own board. The A2 is in charge of the wireless land. So they're in charge of all the microphones, how the cast want them worn. Are we on boom mics? Are we hiding in the hair? If the person's bald, where are we hiding it? That's all their responsibility, and maintaining the mics from night to night. Are we having regular frequency issues? Do we need to find cleaner frequencies? Does this actor sweat a lot? And so we need to take care of that mic. We need to clean it out. We need to dry it off every night so that it keeps working every night. Things like that. That's all the A2's responsibility.
When I interviewed Garrett, and he mentioned the soundscape, I was wondering, do you use it in LA too, or only in UK?
Oh, no, we use it here too. I did a production of Once that was in the round that we use soundscape for, and it's absolutely beautiful. I love the way technology is changing, and I love, soundscape is one of those tools that lets me do a musical and make it sound completely natural. For me, when I do a musical, when I design a musical and it gets reviewed, I want the reviewer in the press to say, this cast has incredibly powerful voices. I understood every word. Their voices were so beautiful. I don't ever want them to say the microphones were loud enough so I could hear them. So I want the audience to believe that the actor is just that loud. I don't want them to be thinking about the microphone, and tools like Soundscape make that possible, because it really helps pull the image back so that the image is directly with the actor and can move with them throughout the show, so that their voice and their microphone sound always comes from the same place that the actor is standing. So it makes it almost impossible for the audience to discern what's a natural voice and what's a microphone. And that I think is amazing, amazing technology, and I'm so excited to work with it.
I wonder, how do people judge sound design? Like when you watch a musical or a play, like how do you know, is it a good sound design, like the best, or just like, mediocre?
So I'm actually part of the Ovation Rules Committee, and I help train the Ovation voters every year. So it's something I get asked a lot. And it's tricky because I think a really good sound design of a play isn't noticed. If the music is if the underscoring is supporting that scene and enhancing that scene, it's also not distracting from that scene. And so maybe you don't even notice it's there. It's just that everything feels heightened. So, I think sound is something that enhances the story and enhances the language of the play without distracting from the language of the play. When I talk about musical design, I say, for example, a big rock and roll musical. There's two ways a designer could attack it. The really good designer can make the rock and roll band as loud as it should be and as exciting as it should be, and you can still hear the vocals above it. You can still understand the lyrics, A mediocre designer will make the band quieter so that you can hear the lyrics. So for me, that's how I can tell the difference. Does the music fill the room? Can I feel it? Am I excited by it? And I can also still understand what's going on, understand the words. So, also, for the more gentle music, some more delicate musicals, the dynamics, what a loud song should be loud and the quiet love song should be quiet. If all the music's the same volume all the way across, you lose that storytelling. You lose that dimension. So I look for the swells. Does the button at the end of the song bump up? Because it adds that excitement. It adds that punctuation. Does the beautiful love song start delicate and then swell? Things like that.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's all about the details. You can always make things heard, but the details is where the storytelling is and where the creativity and skill lie. So
I was wondering if you compare like LA or Broadway to West End in UK, is the sound design similar more or less, or is there something very different about their methods, like their approach?
I haven't worked in the UK, so I don't know. I think the way Los Angeles designers work is very different than New York. I think some of it's just the nature of the type of theaters we work in. Most of the theaters I work in, I'm lucky if I have 10 days to do my design, that I'll get 3 or 4 days of tech and maybe a week of previews if I'm lucky. There are 99 seat houses where we start tech on Saturday and we open on Friday. I get 4 days, whereas a Broadway show, you have a much longer tech period and you have a much longer preview period to work out the problems. So it's exciting to be able to spend that much time working on the details. But it's also, I think when you watch 3 weeks of previews, it's hard to keep the perspective too. You've seen it so many times now. Is it working or does it need to be fixed? Do I need to change something? I've heard it so many times this way. Do I want to change it? So it's, I think the way we work is different because of time period. Even the off-Broadway shows tend to get a lot more time than I get in a house in Los Angeles. So
everybody has an opinion. What do you do if the producer tells you that it's too loud and composer thinks that it's too quiet?
Generally, my approach is I'll try it your way if you'll try it mine, so that I acknowledge that they want something changed, but I also have a chance to say, listen to how I want it, and maybe I'm right. Maybe I can talk you into it. I think if it comes down to an absolute impasse, ultimately it's the director's show. For me, it's, ultimately it's the director's name on the show. And if the director loves a piece of music and I hate it, I will bring them many options. But if they're absolutely adamant and they must have that piece of music, I'm going to let them have it. It's their show. With producers, sometimes I'll have producers come to me, in the musical and say, everything's too loud. And I'll say, well, let's talk about it more. And I'll find that actually the trumpet just felt a little piercing to them. So it's not actually that they want everything turned down, but they didn't know how to express that. And by talking to them longer, really what it comes down to is that trumpet's the problem. And it's like, great, that's something I can fix. And I don't have to turn the whole show down, So I think most of the time with those, a good discussion is a good thing to have. And I think people don't know how to talk about sound, especially people who don't work in sound. They don't have the language to talk about it. So it's really important for the designer to find a way to talk in their language about what we do so that they feel comfortable having opinions and talking about it, as opposed to just shouting everything's horrible and walking away. It's like, That's not a note I can take. But if we talk about it and the horn is too piercing, I can totally fix that, you know. So I think conversation is important.
Can you please give me an example of the language that you use? Like, what terminology do you use?
I mean, I think when it comes to design, my language changes based on the director's language. I tend to morph the words I use into what the director uses. So if a director is always talking about texture, I'll use the word texture when I talk about sound. If the director is always talking about layers or ambiance or I sat through a show where the director talked a lot about color, and that in this play, different colors had different meanings. And so color doesn't affect me at all. There's no color in my sound. But I was listening to those conversations, and the director came up to me during tech and said, I don't think that's the right piece of transition music. And I was like, okay. And I said, what don't you like, or what are you looking for? And they're like, it needs to be more green. And then they looked at me and they're like, that's ridiculous. And I said, no, it's not, because I've listened to all those other conversations and I know what green means to you. I can find a piece of music that feels more green, you know? So I think being in tune with the words they use is really valuable, because then it shows them that you understand what they're saying, you know, and you hear what they're saying and you're trying to give them what they want. I may call it layers and they may call it texture. We're talking about the same thing, but if I keep using a different word, they think I don't understand them. By switching my language to texture, they say, oh, she knows what I'm looking for, you know? So I think my word changes all the time. I'll talk about soft and hard. I'll talk about, punctuation or sting or bounce. I'll talk about, texture and layer and sometimes color. So
that's fascinating.
Yeah.
And what do you discuss with composer?
Again, with a composer, I'll talk about journey and story. I'll talk about emotional shifts and mood. Sometimes I'll talk about instrumentation, but I tend to leave that to them. Sometimes I'll say, this feels like strings, or this feels like guitar, but most of the time I leave that to them. I'll say it, this moment is about peace. This moment is about tension. This moment is harsh. This moment is anxiety, and let them figure out what that instrumentation means, what that means in their language, in their world. So.
Are there many female sound designers or sound engineers?
There are not many of us. There are far too few of us, but there are more and more every day. There are more and more coming out of college and entering the workforce. There are very few of us that do it full time, and there are very few that are, kind of my generation. And I think it's hard for women when they first come out of school. Freelancing is hard. Selling yourself is hard. And negotiating with producers is very hard. And I think it's something that isn't taught to women. We aren't taught how to stand up for ourselves, and we aren't taught how to demand what we want and what we need. And so we tend to, get out into the real world where we're constantly trying to sell ourselves to producers, and it's a hard thing to do. And I think a lot of the women choose to take something more steady, something more consistent. I think for everyone, male and female, freelancing it's hard to find the work-life balance. And I think a lot of women, that's harder on them than it is for a man. A man is more willing, I think, to set their life aside for a couple of years to build their career. where I think women have a much better sense of, no, I have to take care of myself too. And that makes it very hard to survive. But there are more and more every year, and I work with some amazing women. So.
And you mentioned your generation. Is there a difference between your generation and the next generation, I guess?
Yes and no. I mean, I think, when I first started in the field, I had no women as a mentor. Everyone I worked for, everyone I assisted was male. I was very, very fortunate that those men were incredibly supportive of me. I had some amazing mentors, and both people who were formally a mentor, like John Gottlieb at Cal Arts or Drew Dalzell, who I met while I was in school, who really function more as a mentor, but also, I assisted some amazing men at the Taper, people like Darren West or Mark Bennett, Obadiah Eves, a lot of men that, working with them, they treated me with respect. They answered my questions. They didn't laugh at me for not knowing things, and really then encouraged me. Even after the shows were over, I would email them and say, I'm dealing with this situation. I don't know how to handle it. And they'd always happily answer me. And I was very, very lucky to have that kind of support and have those men there to support me and encourage me and back me up when I needed it. I think the generations now, they see more women working in the field. And so I think they're less likely to think, oh, I can't do that because no woman's doing that, because they see the women doing it. But I think it's just as hard. I think it's really hard when you first come out of school. If you're going to be a freelance sound designer, there's no way to look for work. The work has to come to you. And so how do you get your name out there, and how does that start? And it took me, my first couple of years, it was like, how do I get the theaters to know I exist so they hire me? And again, I was very lucky to have these mentors. I would assist Drew, and he'd introduce me to the theater and introduce me to the producer. And then the next time the producer called him, he'd say, well, I'm busy, but you should hire Cricket. So I would say most of my work early in my career came from other sound designers. And I'm at the point in my career when I'm busy, I say, oh, you should call this person. Oh, you should call that person, hire my assistants now. I'm too busy to work. So it's great.
What do you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
What?
What do you wish you knew when you were just starting out?
Ooh. I wish I were better at knowing how to negotiate. And I'm still not great at it. But learning how to ask for what you need, and also learning how to ask for what you are worth. Is it more important to have the job, or is it more important to get paid for that job? And when I was early in the career, it's like, oh, you only have $200? Like, yes, I'd rather have the work. And now it's like, no, if you can't pay what I'm worth, it's okay. I'd rather take the week off. So I think I wish I had more, that I was more ready for that kind of negotiation, knowing I've learned I have to know walking into the negotiation what I'm willing to work for, because the producer's always going to try to go lower, and I have to know where my cutoff is, or I'm going to get talked into something I don't want to do. I can't think of anything else.
You mentioned the work-life balance, and I was wondering, how do you prevent or deal with burnout?
It's really hard. And I love to work. I love working. So I'm going to find every possible way to say yes to a project, because I love working. But then I go 4 months without a day off, and by the end of the 4 months, I'm really tired and I hate everybody. So for me, I need to take time off. I like to, even if you just take an hour and go for a walk in the park, it's, I can turn off my cell phone and nobody can bug me for an hour. It's mine. But I, instead of taking little small breaks through the month or through the week, I tend to just take bigger trips throughout the year. So I set aside a week that I go, or about 10 days that I go to Burning Man in Nevada. And there's no cell service. There's no nothing. I turn my phone off the minute I show up, and I go 10 days. No one can call me. No one can email me. No one can do any. I am there to enjoy the art and the music of Burning Man, and people can wait till I get home. I did the same thing. In December, I took a week and went to Mexico, and it was like, I'm unavailable for the next week. I am doing this. I am out of touch. This is my time to do what I want to do, and you all can wait till I get back. So, but I'm not very good at that life work balance. I need to be better at it. So,
speaking of stress, can you share some stories about memorable sound mishaps?
Oh, yes. I've got some great. I have many great mishaps. I think my favorite mishap ever was during a preview of Allegiance. It was second preview. I was sitting in the house. My engineer was mixing away back there, and we had just done a ton of work on the lead woman's big song towards the end of Act 1. And we had reorchestrated a lot of stuff in the orchestra because we were having trouble getting her voice to really soar above the orchestra. So we had done a lot of work with the orchestra to kind of, and the music director to kind of change the orchestrations a little bit and get more support for her voice. And I was really looking forward to hearing it. And we got about 4 lines in, and the entire sound system turned off. And I thought, and I look back at Christian, who's standing there like this, being like, I didn't do it. And what he saw is, as he was mixing, all of a sudden, all of the lights, go out. All signal drops on every single channel across the board. And he's like, and what happened is that an actor had gone backstage and they had dropped a prop on the prop table, and it had gotten bumped, and it had fallen down and landed directly on top of our power distro. And the prop shattered and fell into the distro, and the entire distro caught on fire. Yeah, so my A2 backstage leapt into action and came running over and cut the main power to the system, which of course turned everything off. And he's frantically pulling cables out of the flames and running around getting extension cords to run the cables through backstage. Of course, from the audience, I have no idea what's happening, but I see one of the other people in the tech row come over and whisper something to my engineer, who rolls his eyes and sits down. I thought, well, that can't be good. So bless the singer's heart, she kept right on singing. The only orchestra members that continued were the string players, because all the lights went out in the pit, and the keyboard, of course, turned off, so the keyboard couldn't play along. The horn players didn't know the music well enough to play without being able to sheet their sheet music. But the string players kept right on going. They knew the song well enough. They just kept right on playing. So she did the whole song with no microphone and just, a couple of violins and a cello. But by the end of her song, the system had, like, one by one, you could hear the speakers popping back on. And Christian stood up and mixed, like, the last verse of the song. And then the audience cheered because the show must go on. But at intermission, I went backstage saying, what in God's name happened? And you could still smell the smoke from backstage. I think that's my best mishap. I've had lots of little things that happen, computers crashing or things going wrong. My engineer once during load-in decided it was too much hassle to walk around the stage and that he was just going to jump over the orchestra pit. It didn't work. He missed and landed in the orchestra pit. Um, so, that caused some excitement for the day. Fortunately, he was fine and didn't break anything. And he took about an hour and a half off to ice his knee and ice his wrist, and then he was back in action. Thank heavens.
He didn't land on anyone in the pit.
Yeah, no, fortunately we hadn't loaded the orchestra in yet. So he didn't hit anything, but he's like, well, it just looked like an easy jump. And I was like, oh my God. It's never an easy jump. Trying to think. We've had I had a keyboardist once. He was using Mainstage on his own personal laptop, and his laptop, whenever it reboots, automatically launches Spotify and starts playing music. So in the middle of the show, he decided to reboot his computer, and we had Motown music randomly playing in the middle of the show. It took my engineer a little time to figure out where the Motown was coming from so that he could stop it. But it's the beauty of live theater. You kind of never know what's going to happen. So.
Wow.
Yeah.
How do you handle this kind of pressure? It's live theater and the audience is watching it happen.
I think the way to handle it is keep a cool head, fix what you can fix, and keep going with the rest of it. It's the engineer, when the Motown music started playing, he stopped the line by line mixing, just turned on all the mics on the stage, and then put his headphones on and started looking for the Motown music. That it was like, I have to give up on this part so I can fix this part. But he kept a calm head. He, kind of just pushed all the mics up, and started popping through. And it took him some time to find it. But if he had panicked, it would have only made it that much harder. And the same thing with, when the whole sound system goes off, it's like, oh, there's nothing you can do. You just got to wait till the guy backstage fixes it. And again, he kept a calm head, and he's like, well, our distro is obviously out because it's on fire. So how do I fix it? And he turned to one of the, stage managers backstage and said, I need extension cords. Go find me every extension cord you can find me. And he ran to every place he could find to plug in, So again, he just kind of kept a cool head and was like, well, what can I fix? What's most important to get plugged back in first, But it's, it's live theater. It's, things are going to happen. And if you panic, it's just going to take you that much longer to figure out the problem and figure out the solution. So.
Is there anything you would like to talk about?
Anything I'd like to talk about?
It's something I should have asked you about,
No, I think sound is about storytelling, just like the other designs. And I think it's a beautiful way to tell a story, and a beautiful way to support a story. And I think it's something that audiences don't think about a lot. And I think it's something that students maybe don't know exists as an option. And so, I'm not a visual person. I don't think visually. So it's a wonderful way for me to tell a story, because my brain works a little different, and that doesn't mean I can't work in theater. It just means I think with my ears, not my eyes, and I respond emotionally to the world through what I'm hearing. And I've always been that way, but maybe not aware of it until later in life. It really took someone else pointing it out to me, saying you're not a visual person. I love to read books. And I think as a designer, being exposed to as many different experiences as you can become very valuable, because it changes the way you look at the world. So I love to travel. I've traveled all over the world, and I meet people and I experience these cities. And so then when I'm doing a play that's set in Baghdad, although I haven't been to Baghdad, I spent a lot of time in Middle Eastern cities. And so I understand that they feel different than a city in the US might feel, that the sounds are different. And I talk about the emotion of a city or the rhythm of a city, and I think being in tune to that is really important for any designer, but especially a sound designer. Spend some time sitting quietly with your eyes closed. You're going to notice things that you've never noticed before, that you had no idea that was there, because our brains are built to ignore sounds we don't think are important. And so it's like, how do you teach your brain to listen to those things, and how does it change the way a room feels? Like, does the room suddenly feel more scary? Do you feel more uncomfortable because you're hearing things you've never heard before? It's like, where are these sounds coming from? And it's like, how can I use that in a play? How can I have an environment subtly shift to feel more uncomfortable now? That it's something that maybe the audience isn't conscious of, but their brain tunes in to something has shifted, something has changed. So that's, for me, the most exciting part of sound design.
What advice would you give to someone who wants to become a sound designer? Are there some very good programs in US, like some particular colleges, or?
There are a lot of great colleges. I don't know the ones in the UK or anything like that, but in the US, CCM has an amazing program. Yale, CalArts, UC Irvine. I'm sure I'm forgetting some. There are lots of great programs. But I also think if you're interested in being a sound designer, reach out to sound designers and ask if you can come shadow them. My experience was very positive when I was young. I would reach out to designers and say, can I come shadow you for a day? Can I just come sit in tech and watch you work? Can I buy you a cup of coffee and talk to you about your job? They're going to tell you things and you're going to notice things, and every designer works a little differently. And so getting a chance to sit next to a lot of them, even for a day, you're going to notice the way they do things, and the way they talk, and the way their paperwork is laid out, and the way their tech tables, my tech table is laid out the same way for every show. I have where I like my things, and they're the tools I need and where they are. And every designer has their own version of it. So I think it's really important for sound designers, for young sound designers, to get a feel of how everybody else does it, so you can find your way to do it, because it's going to be different. You're going to find your own things. I think getting your hands on the software, and the board, getting familiar with the gears. All the manufacturers will, have lectures and seminars. They go to the trade shows. Go and talk to them about their gear, talk to them about how the speakers work, talk to them about their consoles, push buttons, download the free version of QLab, download the free version of Pro Tools, push buttons, learn the stuff. When I'm hiring an assistant, I want them to know how to use Pro Tools. I want them to know how to use QLab. I want them to understand the basics of how my console works, so that if I go up and say, hey, can you make such and such a louder, they know how to do that. And the technology is constantly changing. There's new stuff coming out every year. So the trade shows and the trade magazines are great ways to keep up with what's out there and be familiar with it. Like Soundscape, I saw it at a trade show. I saw a 5-minute demo of it and was blown away. And I reached right out to D&B and said, I want to get my hands on this. And they said, oh, come on down. We'll give you a lesson, And I spent 3 hours working with them, loved it, and spec'd it on my next show. But you don't hesitate to reach out and ask questions. People will answer them. So,
are there internships in LA?
Maybe not a lot. it's been a long time since I've kind of been in that world, especially because I don't teach. So I know I'm doing a show with PCPA, Pacific Conservatory, Pacific Arts, I don't know what it stands for, PCPA, up in Santa Maria, and they have a big internship program. So when I design my show up there in the summer, my A2 and my assistant will be an intern, someone who's in school learning sound design. And it's great for me to learn, to have the interns there and to teach them. And they often have an engineering intern as well. So it's a great chance for people to get hands-on and for me to meet them, because then I turn around and hire them so on the next project. So,
and the last question, what makes a good sound designer?
I think a good sound designer is someone who understands how to tell story, who understands the way that sound and music can affect emotion, and how to use that to, I don't want to say manipulate, but to manipulate the audience's experience. I think a good sound designer knows how to listen. I think a good sound designer knows how to talk, and specifically to talk in a visual world, to people who are visually dominant, and to talk, in their language. I think a good sound designer is collaborative. They want to work with other people. They want to bounce ideas off of other people. They want to, I love sitting with the lighting designer, figuring out the structure of the transition. Do we bump? Do we fade? Do we shift? Do we, the best designs work together with the other people? How does the set move, and how does my sound move with the set? How do I enhance that big scene change, or how do I distract from that big scene change? So I think a sound designer needs to be collaborative too. I think that's it.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for making time for me.
Of course. Let me know if you need anything else.
Thank you.